the presentation. Can he?
Can you hear now?
Hear us.
Now I can, the sound just came on.
We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I could hear you fine and I could see you fine.
It seems like he can hear us, but we can't hear him.
Audio.
Okay, thank you. All right, if he can hear us, then we will just proceed, and then while they're working on figuring what our problem is. So thank you,
Okay.
Stephanie, for your patience.
Alrighty. So the first thing I want to talk with you about is system statistics. So as you know, we're a bifurcated, or what I call a bifurcated community. We have multiple municipalities, 88 specifically, in addition to St. Louis County unincorporated areas. This is important because we don't control land use and zoning in the municipal boundaries. We have our own ordinances that we follow in terms of land use and zoning. And the communities are responsible for their improvements, their roadway improvements. We are responsible for some arterial roads that transcend the municipal boundary, but it does require a lot of coordination to carry projects through as they cross multiple boundaries. We actually have a very large system. We have 3,167 lane miles of road, and I contacted Tom Blair at MoDOT just to see what their lane mileage was in the St. Louis County area. So we actually have 800 more lane miles to maintain than MoDOT does. Now, I don't want to mix apples and oranges together. They do have an interstate system. We're not responsible for the interstate system. We are responsible for subdivision streets, collector roads and arterials. So the complexion is different in some cases, but I wanted to just let you know the magnitude of what we're responsible for. When you talk about those lane miles and center lines, you probably are thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, obviously our roads are not, they don't run just along a little center line. There's multiple lanes in each direction. There's turn bays, center two-way left turn lanes, there's bus pullouts. So there's a number of square yards of pavement that we have to maintain and that we're responsible for. We're responsible for approximately 1,300 miles of sidewalk already, 222 bridges. So again, compared to MoDOT, our bridges might not be quite as large or long, wide or long as some of MoDOT's bridges, but we do have a healthy number. We maintain over 1,000 crossroad culverts and 670 signals, some of which are pedestrian and or school beacon type signals. And what I can say when you look at the statistics, and you will see this in graphs that we present here in a minute, that our assets have increased over time, and particularly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but population has stayed stagnant. Most of that infrastructure is old. Even the last big increase in mileage, in lane mileage in our community was from the 1990s. So already we're at 30 years old. And as you can see from this graph, every year, this graph is telling you that we added mileage every year. So back starting in the 1900s, we have pavement. We had a great uptick in the 1950s and even greater still in the 60s and 70s. So that infrastructure is already out there. Its value is $1.78 billion. We have a responsibility to maintain it because people use it. And it's already there, and we spent a lot of money, time, and sweat to put it in the ground. So I just don't want you to forget that the responsibility that we have to maintain a large number of miles. As they age, it becomes more expensive to maintain. So that's kind of a lay of the land. Now let's figure out how we got there, and it's really square based on land use, to be frank, and land use affects walkability and funding. So again, I mentioned the road system that we have, the arterial road that for us carries more of our traffic in St. Louis County. Obviously, the interstates that MoDOT maintains carries a lot of traffic. The arterials connect to each other into the interstate system. The collector roads connect our subdivisions to our arterial roads, and then we have the subdivision streets. So we're very varied. The complexion varies, the speed varies, the number of lane varies. So this is a graphic. Hope you can't see it as well on that slide, and I apologize for that. This was a nice backdrop to show you visually how land use affects walkability. This is Anytown, USA, but it is definitely in some parts of our town, USA. You see the clusters of residential development, you see a lot of streets, you don't see necessarily a lot of interconnectivity. You see that people have to walk a long way to get to where they want to go, which is the main street at the top of the slide, and that's where our stores are, our gas stations, our five and dimes and things of that nature. So we don't have a good grid system in most places in St. Louis County, even in municipalities that we don't control land use for. We kind of all build out the same, and we cluster our development. And when we lack connectivity, we lack opportunity for walking and biking to get us where we need to go efficiently and timely. And you can also look at it in terms of our waterways. So consider that our residential development is the small tributaries, and obviously water flows to the greater, bigger channels. And the greater, bigger channels is where our stores are and our churches and our industry. And so we have to be cognizant that we're having to provide the infrastructure that gets people to the stores and to their jobs. So this is a subdivision in South St. Louis County in Council District 6. It lies between Telegraph and Christopher Drive. And when you first see it, you know, when I mentioned grid system, you're like, hey, that's a grid system. It sure looks like it. There's 90-degree angles and it looks all square and it's really nice, except those streets don't connect. There are a lot of cul-de-sacs and stub streets. And so we learned early in math that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So here's a school near a subdivision, and if you lived in this cul-de-sac, if you popped the fence and trespassed in other people's yards, you were only 300 feet away from that school, but you can't do that. And so we didn't develop that way. So if you were going to take the sidewalks and streets to get to this school, it would be a half-a-mile walk. So we don't build with the shortest distance between 2 points in mind. Here's a different look at that same subdivision, a different area of it. At the ends of the two ends of the purple line are neighbors that live 300 feet apart. But in order to walk to them without doing what I said before, trespassing, going over fences and things like that, you have to walk 1.5 miles. So shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but we don't build that way. And I'm not saying that back in 1965, when our subdivision ordinance was put in place, that people did the wrong thing. They did what they thought was right at the time, but it hasn't evolved much. And so what we get, remember that most of our mileage and most of our infrastructure was put in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, not in the last 30 years. So that subdivision ordinance set the table. So we know that roadway design and what we put in the field in terms of infrastructure and development patterns go hand in hand. And we know, we've seen that based on the exodus from our bigger city, the need for low density or the desire for low density development, more elbow room between our neighbors, and the idea that the car was the thing, and it was the thing in the 50s and 60s and 70s, that even today, I own a car, you all own cars, they're the thing. We have to lay more pavement to get people where they want to go. So when you look at it, comparing road mileage to both population and to budget, you can see that at one time in the 60s and in the 70s, we were on the positive side of this discussion. We had more people than we had mileage, and we had more money than we had mileage. And so we could take care of our system pretty well. But you can see starting in 1970, 75, and the 80s, that dropped off. So we were building, what does that first graph tell you? We were building more roads than we had population for. Why? Because we liked that low density development. And that's what our subdivision ordinance put in place. That's what guided us. And then, of course, money, I've been telling you all at the council meetings and probably every chance that I get, we don't have enough money to maintain what we have. And this proves it. Joe actually went in to Paul Kreidler's office to look at the budget books from 1970 compared to mileage. These are hard numbers based on what we presented to the councils at the time. We don't have enough money to maintain what we already have, let alone adding anything new. And it's it makes it hard for us. That's what I'll say. So when we have vehicle-centric zoning and we're focusing on the vehicle, we're having those conversations about parking, and we're having those conversations about lot size minimum and frontages and things like that. But what does that mean? When we're focused on vehicle-centric zoning, we're not focused on walkability, and it makes it difficult to achieve a walkable community. We have lower overall density development. We don't have mixed use. We have less potentially sense of place. We have more infrastructure to maintain. When we have zoning segregation where we cluster our residential developments with each other and we don't mix use, and we put our commercial centers on the main streets, the Manchester roads, the Hanley roads, the Brentwood, the Big Bend, when we do that, and that follows our zoning and subdivision ordinances, when we do that, what do we get? What does that mean? That walkability is difficult. People have to decide that they want to walk a long distance from their home to where they want to buy their shampoo. I don't know, making something up. The long distance then doesn't lead to people desiring to choose a different mode. And then when you're on that main street like Manchester, you've probably all driven it or something like it. It's uncomfortable sometimes because there's so many cars and you go so slow, and it's just like, when are we going to get through all this traffic? And so that leads us to talk about making the roads bigger and bigger and bigger. That's more pavement and more to maintain. When we have zoning stagnation and we don't look at new ways of doing things, and again, I'm not throwing stones. People thought what was right at the time was right. And it worked for many years. But when you have zoning stagnation and you don't have mixed use, what do you get? You get walkability that's difficult to achieve. You don't have those small commercial stores where your people live, where they can get to it because it's a block away, the corner pub, the corner drugstore. So we can develop in different ways. You can have a pedestrian-centric commercial development. It probably serves less people, probably doesn't have as much product because it's dependent on people getting there mostly by foot. But you still have to accommodate the car in some cases. We have some of that development. We don't have a lot of it, but we have some of it. And where we have it, like in your Webster Groves, Kirkwood, and other areas that have those nice center, those boutiques that you like to go to, most people like myself have to take my car to get there. So I definitely am looking for a parking space. When you're talking about vehicle-centric commercial, those are your big box stores, and they're designed to hold a lot of product, and their circumference area is larger. So they are expecting that you're going to drive there. They're enticing you to drive there from many miles away. Pros and cons to both. If you have a pedestrian-centric residential subdivision, you have the opportunity in your subdivision for your 100 neighbors or so to go to the Five and Dime at the corner or catch a burger at a restaurant that's on the corner. But we don't develop that way. Ours are more vehicle-centric. When you're walking in your subdivision, you're just going to be walking to someone else's house or right past it. We accommodate parking. We have a lot of road to maintain. But it's not necessarily pedestrian-centric like you think about in a more urban condition. A pedestrian-centric layout offers a grid system, and as you can see by the picture on the right and what I told you in the exhibits that I showed you before, we don't have pedestrian-centric. Sometimes we only have one way in and one way out of subdivisions. We certainly don't offer a lot of mode choice all the time. So what we've learned is that existing land use must be considered when evaluating roadway capacity, that the public that supports pedestrian traffic has told us when we meet with them at our public meetings that don't take away their car. They still want to be able to use their car and get to things using their car because it's convenient. The need for vehicles, we believe, can be reduced with a mixed-use development, but that requires resetting the table first and foremost with a new subdivision ordinance and new zoning codes. But it also requires a lot of money because the table's been set. $1.78 billion of investment over time has led to the infrastructure that we have to maintain. So it's going to take money to change it. And then St. Louis County should consider, we believe, exploring new ways of thinking about our communities and making complete communities versus complete streets. But again, it takes money to reset the table, and it takes some fortitude as well. So now Joe will talk about design standards.
Madam Chair, can we
Yes.
test and see if Councilman Fitch, if we can hear him?
Councilman Fitch?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can now. Thank
Okay, and
you.
you can, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Valenci, the slides are displaying backwards. That may be difficult for some of the audience to view.
Okay.
That is streaming out on YouTube, so I will check into that. Thank you.
No problem.
But ours is going the right way. Ours is okay.
Weird. Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Days and the Public Improvements Committee. I'm going to walk us through our design standards, where they are today, and some of the challenges that we face looking into the future, as well as covering what we've accomplished so far with our Complete Streets Ordinance and our action plan for walking and biking. So first, it's very important to understand where our standards come from. And the federal government, Federal Highway Administration, sets these standard expectations for transportation infrastructure. They publish the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is the tome that sets, governs how we mark lanes, what those lane markings should look like. It governs how traffic signals look and operate. It governs when traffic signals should be installed. What are the warrants for installing a traffic signal? They also point us to the guidance they want used for roadway design, which is the AASHTO publications and manuals. AASHTO is a nonprofit liaison between state departments of transportation and the federal government. They have a variety of different manuals that cover roadway design, pedestrian design, bridge design, and many other technical areas. They're very, very complete manuals. And then finally, we have the proposed public rights-of-way accessibility guidelines published by the United States Access Board, also referred to as PROAG. That manual sets the rules for ADA compliance within our network. Those are national standards that we have adopted. We are following the current FHWA standards. But there is a national conversation about roadway design standards and whether or not they are appropriate as we move into the future. Current standards, it's important to understand, are designed for safety at speed. Essentially, we have a population that loves the automobile. And the traffic engineers over the last generation have strove to ensure safety for the drivers on our ever expanding roadway network. There's a lot of effort that has went into that over the generation, extensive testing, experimentation, statistical analysis. And this is all driven by post-World War II development patterns, the auto-centric development pattern. So these engineers, they did what was right. They tried to improve safety to the greatest extent practicable with the desire of the public in those development patterns. So it's important to understand context when we start talking about changing fundamentally how we grow our communities and how we live, that what came before was a product of the desire of the community. So this national standard, the national conversation about changing standards is about looking at a pedestrian first approach or safety over speed in road design. What does that mean? It means that the pedestrian is the primary consideration when you're doing a road design. And the person in the automobile is just a visitor to that pedestrian environment. Some of the, I'm going to say, controversial to the general public considerations are reducing speed limits to 20 to 25 miles an hour on any road that has a sidewalk. And changing road design so that they're uncomfortable or even unsafe for cars to travel at speeds faster than that. The big problem with that shift right now is those aren't accepted national standards. And in fact, there isn't a comprehensive national standard that even covers how to do these things just yet. There are guides, but they're just that, guides right now. Moving in that direction relies a lot more on art and opinion than it does on a science of a decision-making process based on those long-standing statistical analysis that FHWA has done on the existing manuals that we have. And lowering speed limits is complicated. Motorists tend to travel at the speed at which they're comfortable. And most of our roads, including our subdivision streets, in many cases, as I know most of you have had a complaint or two about, they feel safer to travel fast. They feel safe to travel faster than 25 miles an hour. What we know is that simply changing the sign will not slow down the motorists. And in fact, increases danger because you will have a percentage of the population who will follow that new low speed limit. But you will have a larger number of people who don't follow that speed limit. And now you have a situation where that differential in speed is significantly higher. And it'll cause more accidents and more severe accidents because that differential in speed. So it's something we want to be very conscious of. Making a knee-jerk reaction to simply lower the speed limit on a road can actually increase danger. And it's something we want to always be conscious of. So how do we lower a speed limit successfully? What do we need to do? Well, we make it feel like you can't go fast or you shouldn't go fast. It doesn't feel safe to go fast. You put in narrow lanes, reduce the number of lanes, move buildings closer to the roadways, plant trees and other objects close to the road, introduce jogs or what we call chicanes into the path of the vehicle, introduce planted medians, and pretty much anything else that will introduce psychological friction to the driver. So why don't we do this everywhere? Well, recall how the county is built out. We are built out as an auto-centric community. There is huge value in walkable communities, and I don't want to discount that. But our existing neighborhoods are not built in a way that the average citizen wants to walk 3 miles to go walk down to their local pub or their local grocery store or their church, or in many cases, much farther than that. People still are going to drive their cars to get there unless we change how the environment looks. So if we're going to do these things, extensive public outreach is essential. It requires a significant investment in new infrastructure, and our project costs increase dramatically. So some of these guides, though, we do use them. NACTO, for example, is a guide for more pedestrian-centric development, generally within a high-density urban corridor, mostly for cities, but there are places in the county where it can be applicable. And that tome, there's a number of things that aren't compliant with federal guidelines. However, we always look at those for ideas, and we can use those ideas within the context of our accepted standards. So we do look at guidance for being innovative. We do try, and we just always have to repackage it and figure out how it fits with what we're actually allowed to do. So the other thing important to note is that just because something even is included in our standards doesn't mean we build it. The standards are a set of design standards that are options. And what we actually build is always going to be context sensitive, limited by our budget, and not just our short-term budget. We're not just talking about building it. We're talking about maintaining it in the long term. When we add features, we're adding more to maintain. If we're not doing something to increase revenues or decrease our overall maintenance burden at the same time, it's a losing battle. And so when we deploy safety countermeasures, which have been at issue, we really do try to be strategic. We don't have the staff or the budget to install everything everywhere, as much as we'd like to. We don't have the budget or staff to maintain what we have. We're losing ground every day. High incident locations, we are prioritizing. And we're looking at equity as a major factor. We've got a West Florissant completely reimagining of that corridor, 3 miles long. We're doing many of these things. $32 million for a 3-mile corridor to do this. If that was a maintenance project, it would be $3 to $4 million. So we're talking about a 10-fold increase in cost to make this transformation. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Give me money. I want to do it everywhere. but unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So even when we're looking at these projects, equity is a huge issue. Where can we get the biggest bang for the buck? Where can we maybe get these redevelopment patterns to build these walkable communities? Because walkable community is not just the road. It's the stores. It's the houses. It's people coming together as a community. And we want to foster that, but we have to be very careful in how we do that to make sure that we make the best use of public funds and have the best impact. So next thing I want to cover is kind of the difference between a pedestrian first design and a complete streets philosophy. So complete streets is the incorporation of pedestrian elements into our automobile oriented environment. Pedestrian first design is reimagining of the corridor as a pedestrian facility where the car is the guest. Can that work? Absolutely. Where else does it work? Other countries, if you go to the Netherlands, you look at Amsterdam, there are communities that honestly look fantastic to live in. It is something to aspire to. But we are talking about a generational change in St. Louis County to get there. We can lay the groundwork for it, but it's something that's going to take a very long time to fully accomplish. And because our long-term success is going to require thinking differently about how we develop land, getting the public to want to live differently. These are big issues. This isn't a complete streets ordinance. This isn't just the road design standard, much bigger issues. So the DOT doesn't even really have the authority to adopt a pedestrian first design. We're kind of have our hands tied by the federal standards. And we don't have, even if we wanted to, we don't have the capacity to generate our own standard. We simply don't have the manpower. So political leaders, can you do it? Well, maybe. It would require incredibly strong leadership and regional planning that is spread out over multiple terms. Without a current accepted national standard, there are some legal liability concerns that have to be figured out to make sure that engineers are comfortable sealing plans, that we don't open up ourselves to litigation, which further drains our limited funding. DOT, we really can't pivot our workflow on a dime due to both staffing and funding constraints. The way we lock in funding, we lock that in years ahead. When we apply for a project until we get boots on the ground is 4 to 5 years. So the stuff that's in the pipe is what it is. We can certainly start looking at changes as we move forward, but we really don't have a lot of options with the projects that have already been programmed. And we will have to take, if we want to move in that direction, we'll have to take great care to make sure that we stay eligible for those federal funds. Those are essential to making anything happen for St. Louis County. So we haven't been stagnant though. We've made significant progress. The St. Louis County endeavored to update our design criteria extensively, and that process began in 2014. It was a comprehensive rewrite of our manual, 416 pages. We redrafted 122 standard drawings, which required review compliance with county ordinances, federal regulations, and that final document was published in March of 2020. We managed to improve transparency for our customers. We adopted current national standards and provided directions for usage. And the new manual actually allows for significantly greater design flexibility than our previous manual did. This is an example of what a standard drawing looks like. And these are actually significantly more complicated than just a plan sheet. Because what we're doing is we're trying to create a template that you can apply to multiple situations. So it's a performance specification in drawing form with lots and lots of notes on how to apply it and how it applies to different situations. These actually take quite a bit of time to work through, even though the line work looks relatively simple. So our pedestrian specific enhancements that our new manual adopted were, we officially adopted PROAG, the federal ADA requirements. We introduced a St. Louis County ADA checklist to help permit projects as well as the department upgrade our ADA facilities. We introduced many new standard curb ramp configurations for various site-specific constraints. We offer design guidance for balancing ADA with vehicular needs. We allow, like I said, much greater design flexibility. And we introduced a design exception process. And that allows for innovation where our published criteria is insufficient. So our standards are updated. Generally, when national standards are updated, permit requirements change, such as an ordinance revision, or there's some other county-specific need identified. It's not a regular cycle. It's a need-based cycle. When update is required, staff evaluates the need, we draft the revisions, and eventually publish. It can be a long process depending on the scope of the revision needed. And then we are limited by staffing. We don't have a lot of people. Our people are primarily focused on making sure we don't lose federal funding. So my limited staff, when we have to start cutting corners, we start cutting corners on things like updates to the manual, because we do not want to lose that money. And then complex issues require study and experimentation. So we are currently looking at a project up in Castle Point. It's a neighborhood which has historically had, I think, about every issue you could have in a subdivision. So we're looking at some really innovative and exciting things up there and test them out. That way we can, because we know we have a problem, we can document it before and after and really judge our success, and then use that to further update our manual. So one place that we are lacking, and I will admit to this, is the FHWA Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian. Currently, we only use 4 of the 7 recommended countermeasures in that FHWA guideline. So the 3 that we don't use currently are rectangular rapid flashing beacons, pedestrian hybrid beacons, and raised crosswalks. The rectangular rapid flashing beacon and the pedestrian hybrid beacon, we've generally stayed away from those because we've installed full-blown pedestrian signals instead. We've thought that that was easier to maintain, but we are looking at doing some test installation of the flashing beacons, and we will, once we are looking for some opportunities to try out a pedestrian hybrid beacon. Raised crosswalks are one that is going to take further exploration. But as I mentioned before, we have the Castle Point subdivision where we have a test bed. So complete streets. The ordinance was passed in 2013, and the department immediately adopted the elements into our programming process. We established an interdepartmental advisory team with membership from various county departments. We convened a peer advisory committee, which has representatives from various regional stakeholders. And we developed an action plan for walking and biking and a regional bike plan, which I'll talk about in a few more slides. So financially, what did we accomplish? So prior to the Complete Streets Ordinance, we spent about 5% of our construction dollars on pedestrian type facilities. After that, we doubled that number. And currently, as this slide shows, the items that I could very easily pull out of our bid tabs shows about a 13% of our total construction budget. That's actually low. That's incredibly conservative. That doesn't include the money we're spending on right-of-way, property acquisition. That doesn't include retaining walls and a number of other things that I can't actually assess without doing a deep dive into every set of plans. But very conservatively, 13% of all construction dollars bid are going directly to pedestrian projects or pedestrian facilities. That number conservatively is probably at least a couple points higher. What have we accomplished? Well, 38 miles of dedicated on-street bicycle lanes, 12.8 miles of signed bicycle routes. We created a complete streets checklist, a road diet policy. We revised and published a bicycle facility plan, published the action plan for walking and biking. We revised standards for bicycle and pedestrian accommodation. We've performed complete streets evaluations of 47 roadway segments. We hold regularly scheduled meetings with regional stakeholders. We participate in regional initiatives. We provide staff training. We participate in walkability audits. We have replaced the approximately 55 miles of 5-foot sidewalk, 877 push buttons, and over 5,600 curb ramps. So our standard process, whenever we're programming a project, is we always build new curb ramps and we look at bus landing pads and coordinate those with Metro. And beyond that, we always look at other options, and that's going to kind of depend on the scope of the project. Installation of accessible pedestrian signals, placement of refuge islands, other sidewalk improvements, multi-use paths, coordination with Great Rivers Greenway and others to connect off-street trails and whatnot into our network. We look for opportunities to reconfigure pavement to incorporate bicycle lanes. And we're always looking to leverage partnering opportunities. So what is the action plan for walking and biking? Well, it's a plan to create a safe, connected, equitable transportation system that supports people of all ages and abilities. It's a rather lofty goal. We do want to improve safety for pedestrians. Pedestrians and bicyclists are injured and killed at a much higher rate than motorists. That is a fact. We want connectivity. And again, remember what we went over earlier, connectivity is hard, but we want to connect people to the places they want to go. So that's one of the big goals of the plan. Equity is a huge part of this. We didn't look at just race, but we looked at age, poverty, limited English proficiency, living without a motor vehicle. We looked at a lot of elements at the equity front to make sure that wherever we do these improvements, we can maximize impact and maximize the effectiveness of our dollars. We collaborated with, I think, everybody in the region. We collaborated with our health department to identify areas where there's pockets of asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and other medical conditions. Ultimately, we want this to be an inclusive system. We want it to be a comfortable system. That means that it's a low-stress facility that bicyclists and pedestrians are comfortable using to get where they need to go. And finally, reliability. Other than stating that we don't have the money for a reliable system, even if we build it initially, that's probably one of the hardest ones. It's a very long-term commitment. We published the action plan in April of 21. It calls for 60+ miles of sidewalk projects, 360 miles of trails and side paths, 75 miles of physically separated bikeways, 210 miles of visually separated bikeways, and 110 miles of mixed traffic bikeways. The challenges we see: public support, political support, insufficient funding, and insufficient staffing. The price tag on this is estimated $274 million to put these facilities in. And then after we install them, we have to maintain them. So what are the barriers? Well, let's talk about lack of public support, because this one is interesting on a number of levels. In many cases, improving the pedestrian experience does require the reduction of vehicular capacity. And what we've seen time and time again is there are pockets of activists who are very vocal up front. And then once we roll these things out to the public, we find out there's a silent majority who want nothing to do with it. It's disheartening for the department when we put the effort into these things, just to find out that, well, that the public at large really didn't want it. It does require acquisition of property, often through eminent domain. So condemning property to take the land that we need, we compensate for it. We always compensate. But that doesn't make the residents feel any better when now that they have less of a front yard or less of a backyard, or the tree that their grandfather planted is now being ripped out of the ground. There is a fear of increased crime. It's a common theme. The people who have never had a sidewalk or a trail near their house suddenly have strangers walking by their windows all day and night. There's a very real fear by a number of residents when those situations come up. And then, as I mentioned, removal of established trees is a very emotional issue for a lot of residents. And it's hard to work through at times. So, and then we have political support, which often wanes when we need to condemn for property, or when that silent majority comes forward and says, no, we as the community don't really want this. And that's you doing your job. I'm not criticizing. But it is where, that support is necessary to move forward with these. No matter how many studies we do, no matter how many plans we put together, at the end of the day, there has to be a will to actually push it through. And there's a tangent to that, and that's where ARS roads, if we reduce the capacity, it's no longer an arterial. We, take a 5-lane road and we make it a 2-lane road and we make it a pedestrian mecca, but now it only carries 6,000 cars. It's not an arterial anymore. Now the municipality, we're handing it back to them, which they may not be ready for, they may not have the budget for. So giving real examples, we have had multiple projects that have suffered that we've put a lot of work into to try to make these improvements that have just gone nowhere. Union Road from St. Louis city limits to Rebus Barracks Road, we were going to repurpose pavement to introduce bicycle lanes. It was going to be a fabulous connection between the city of St. Louis to the trailhead south of I-55. Public resoundingly told us they weren't interested. Had a project on Bayless from I-55 to Lima Ferry. We haven't built it yet, but early in the process, we went to the public and we said, hey, we really want to repurpose some pavement. We can do some great pedestrian facilities here by getting bike lanes in, some protected bike lanes. They resoundingly told us they weren't interested. Dealman Road from Olive to Page, same thing. We wanted to repurpose some pavement to get in some bicycle facilities. Public said they weren't interested. Gravoy Road, MoDOT had a project. They were resurfacing, and there was an opportunity that our planning department worked very hard with MoDOT to repurpose pavement and make it introduce some pedestrian facilities. And again, the public wasn't interested. So we've also had the same problem with sidewalk projects. Hannah Road sidewalk, little project. We're gonna have to take down 3 trees. Killed the project. Hudson Road sidewalk. We were going to fill a sidewalk gap. Would have been a great service to the community. The residents there weren't interested and folded political support for the project. Eddy and Park sidewalk. We have 4 parcels. 3 of the parcels, the residents were adamantly against, and they were forcing us into incredibly expensive condemnation settlements, which were going to totally destroy our budget. The property to take down a couple trees was going to be significantly more than the sidewalk. Milburn Road sidewalk. Council person knew that the residents who we were going to have to take part of their front yard weren't going to be interested. So he had us cancel the project. Larimore sidewalk is another one that lost political support and went nowhere. And then Clayton and Ballas intersection, we partnered with Town and Country. It's going to be a great improvement out there. A single parcel was going to be over $1 million to settle with. They took the condemnation to court. We weren't killing the business. We weren't buying it out. We were affecting their parking. $1 million. We didn't have the budget for that. So beyond those situations, we're just not sufficiently funded in general. Annually, we're 30 to 50 million short for basic system maintenance. We have a $200 million need for ADA upgrades. We have a $274 million need to fulfill the promises of our action plan for walking and biking. The graph you see here is the one I showed you at the budget meetings last year. The green line is where we need to be to maintain a minimum pavement condition. The red line is where we're going. It's not promising. So federal funds, I hear that all the time. Federal funds, just the federal government, they'll bail us out. No, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. No matter what, even if federal funds were infinite, we are limited by our local match. We run out of local match money because we have to put up somewhere between 20 and 50% on every project. We run out of that. Once that runs out, we are not eligible for any more federal funds. So let me walk you through a real quick example here on what that looks like. So if we had a $10 million federal program, and best case scenario is an 80-20 match. Feds are going to pay 80%, we bring 20 to the table. The federal government is only going to bring that 8 million to the table. So our local match of 2 million, total program of 10. So we submit a laundry list of projects. And once that $10 million is eaten up, you see on the black line there, that's the cutoff. If you didn't score above that $10 million line, it's not happening. But we say, project number 6, we really need that. So let's add some stuff to it, make it score better. Absolutely, we do that. We add $1 million worth of enhancements. Maybe it's a multi-use trail. So now it's a $3 million project. It's successful now. It's fantastic. Project 4 and 5 now are unsuccessful, which were previously successful. So those roads aren't going to get treated. So how do we deal with that? Well, our only option, because this is only a $10 million program, if it's an 80-20 split, is to bring more money to the table. So if we bring another $1 million to the table, we increase our local match. So now we're bringing $3 million to the table to match to that federal $8 million. Now we get one more project. Project number 5 is still off the table because it still falls below that line, that combination of match plus federal money. Here, we're showing bring 3 plus 8, it's an $11 million program, but it still limits. And finally, we have significant staffing issues. In the year 2000, we had 606 employees in the Department of Transportation. If you ignore, or we have a number of positions that we can't fill anymore. So this is a slide from last year's budget, but things haven't changed much. We have about 380 some employees to get the job done that it took 606 to do in the year 2000. Our system's gotten harder to maintain, not easier. We have more obligations, not fewer. And adding more to the system, it requires more people, more funds. Right now, we have positions that are going unfilled for years. And that's largely because county staff is paid far below prevailing wage. Situation isn't even any better on the engineering side. Our planning and engineering staff are stretched to their limits. We've had expanding regulatory requirements, which have significantly increased the burden of getting even basic projects completed. And we've had a sustained high workload versus staffing for quite a long time, which doesn't leave nearly as much time as I need to properly train and foster innovation. And our vacancies are really hard to fill. We're about 25% under market. And we have a very poor reputation as an employer. And when I talk about staff pay, I don't want you to see this as, I want you to pay staff better because it's fair. That's not it at all. If you look at a successful company, why do they pay staff fairly? They do it because it makes them money. It makes them more profitable. The government isn't that different. Paying staff fairly means we have less turnover, means we increase efficiency. It means we're actually more effective at providing services for our constituents. So a summary, our standards and programming decisions are tightly coupled to existing land use. Our infrastructure is built to serve a low density development pattern, and it's prohibitively expensive to maintain. The DOT currently does use national standards, which I am hopeful that the federal government will update because they require a number of things that can use updating. We could potentially adopt a pedestrian first road design philosophy, but it's challenging. And it's not just road design, it's land use and it's public involvement. Unless significant additional funding becomes available, our average system condition will continue to fall across all categories. Pavement, sidewalk, paths, bike lanes, it doesn't matter. We don't have enough to maintain what we have. Everything's going to continue falling. And adding additional features will always degrade service further. I can only spend $1 once. Anything I add to column A comes out of column B. It's just an unfortunate reality. I hate to be doom and gloom, but I just want to explain the situation in concrete terms so you can understand the full context of the problems that we're looking at, and they're far from simple. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Let me check to see if there are any council members with any questions. Councilman Harder?
So the reason we're here, I missed the first part, I apologize. Is there an issue, people want speeds to be reduced in certain areas? Is that why we're here?
A variety of issues. So we are being asked to install additional pedestrian facilities in many locations of various sorts, whether it be signals, sidewalks, etc., and to lower speed limits and to start installing speed tables and things like that along arterial roads. So there's in a general belief that the county is not using current standards.
Okay. So a couple things you mentioned there. So when we approve a subdivision, we are approving with sidewalks. Is that our standard? Or
Yes,
is
sir.
that an option?
That is standard with certain exceptions. I believe subdivision development cul-de-sacs less than a certain number of parcels aren't required to have sidewalk, and sidewalk is waived on occasion.
And whose authority? Is it planning and zoning or,
Yes,
or
Department-
transportation?
No, planning and zoning.
Okay. What about width, thickness, type of streets that are in our county right now? Is that regulated by your department,
It's regulated by the subdivision ordinance.
which is recommended in a new development by your department, right?
We have standards which have templates drawn out for what is depicted in the ordinance. I'm sure that the Department of Transportation had something to do with it long ago, but we haven't looked at changing how subdivisions are developed in my tenure.
So if we take on a new subdivision and builder comes before planning and zoning, you're gonna tell them how thick the street needs to be, how wide, how long.
Yes, sir.
Rollover curbs or not. You're gonna tell him all that, and he knows that going in. It isn't up for discussion. Is that true?
Within certain bounds, there are always exceptions that can be requested. And I don't have the statistics on how often those are granted, but looking at the uniformity of our system, I would say they aren't granted often.
So, and that's been in place for last 10, 20 years? of
Since I
subdivisions?
believe 1965.
Okay, so since 65, we've been installing and enforcing the way our streets are to be built because the developers build them. The county normally doesn't. And then we wind up maintaining them later on, correct?
That is correct.
Unless they're a private
one-
street,
Pardon?
unless they're a private street.
That is correct. And one correction, I believe the requirement for sidewalk was actually implemented sometime in the 80s. So that, just to be completely upfront.
Okay. Are we approving private streets anymore in developments?
Yes, that does happen from time to time. And in fact, there's a development recently called the Preserve, which they had roads on top of sinkholes. And the department said that we can't take on that risk and obligation. So if there's some mitigating circumstances fairly extreme, there are times when we will not accept maintenance.
Okay, so then it's a risk and return on the developer at that point. And he or she lets those buyers of those homes know that these are private streets, you're gonna have to maintain them forever.
That is
because the
correct.
county's not gonna take them over, correct?
Correct.
So there is some disclosure there.
Yes, sir.
Because I've had people in my district where they've, developers have built streets and they're way below standards for the time. And then they come back to us 20 years later and say, will you take over these streets? And there's no way, you'd have to rip everything up to even get up to basic minimum standards that we have. And I was always wondering why we would even accept the standards of a private street just because it's private. Does that mean they can do anything they want? Or should there be a different level of standards for them that gets it close, but maybe not to the full extent that we have now?
That's honestly outside of my field of expertise. I don't know. I would have to lean on our Department of Planning for that answer.
That's fine. The use of slowing of speed, what do you call them? Speed reducing features like speed bumps, beacons, crosswalks, jogs, roundabouts, things like that. Is that going to be a recommendation for every road going forward, or is that up to us to decide and approve them on an individual basis going forward?
That's a decision that we're kind of looking for to council to direct us as to where do you want us to invest our resources? And some of those issues are, I think, in a subdivision, a lot easier. Those are the perfect test beds. They're supposed to be slow environments that are pedestrian centric, that have connectivity. That's a great place to start. I'm a bit risk averse when it comes to doing some of these experiments on a busy arterial. I'll be honest.
Okay, and going back to, well, we talked about funding, so everything's funding related. I mean, we can have every possible thing out there, but it's all funding. Has your department come up with your suggestions for the ARP funding for one-time investments, and where would you put that if your department was picked for that ARP funding going forward?
My understanding was that the ARP funding wasn't generally applicable to roadway improvements. That was the last word I had. Stephanie, do you have further information?
So we did prepare a list of projects that we would like to use ARPA funding for, and it transcended both transportation and public sites, so horizontal and vertical infrastructure. We're understanding, and we have the guide that we're going through. It's about 27 pages, I think, in and of itself. And the general infrastructure for roads is not based on what we know right now, is not accepted. It's more water sewer, green infrastructure, permeable pavement, and things of that nature. And if like bulb outs and things are included in a project, it would be ARPA would support the bulb out, but the actual redesign and reconstruction of the road and the new drainage and everything that would accommodate the bulb out would be on the county as best we know it. But we did present, what we did actually on the transportation side is put a slug of a $40 million request for pavement preservation because it's falling apart. So that was what we did both on the horizontal infrastructure side and then a slug of funds for the vertical infrastructure
Will
side.
ARPA pay for the, ARP funds pay for that?
No, at the time when we submitted it, we did not know. We were just putting our greatest needs together.
Okay.
Community stability, trash and things that vacant properties and things, you know, we lumped everything in based on the needs that we had before us. But I think that what we're learning is for facility infrastructure, both horizontal and vertical, that is not what ARPA could support. Now, if that changes, I'll be the first to ring the loudest bell. You can trust me on that.
Because I thought infrastructure was the main focus of that our bridges
Infrastructure, but it's a
and
lot of like
roads and
fiber
highways.
infrastructure and infrastructure that's more green. So that could be, again, that could be related to pedestrian and bicycle, but it's not, you know, if we have to rebuild a roadway to accommodate a wider sidewalk, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's an element of a bigger project. Or we have to buy right-of-way to accommodate that wider sidewalk. They're not going to pay for the right-of-way acquisition. So, you know, if the wider sidewalk, you know, 5 foot, 6 foot, 10 foot is $500,000, but it takes us $3 million of property to get that $500,000, we're on the hook for $3 million. That's how I understand it.
So that list you always give us at budget time of your triage of roads and bridges, where you rank them and, you know, what our worst bridges are and so on. So you're saying that we can't go back through that list and pick the top 5 bridges and say, we want to
No.
use ARP funds for these bridges?
Yeah, what we're understanding, now again, it's, you know, we have more research and I know various people are looking at the language. What I'm understanding is that there might be opportunity through the reauthorization bill, because, you know, the government right now is looking at putting money towards infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, through the authorization bill at the federal government level. So we're trying to position ourselves to, actually, I challenged staff for every council district. I said, I want you to at least give me one pedestrian-centric project, multi-mode-centric project, and one traditional road and or preservation project, so that when you tell me there's money available, what can I do that I could get boots on the ground in 6 to 12 months and within 12 or 18 to 24 months. So I've challenged staff to look at that. The earmark we requested, and Congresswoman Bush is advancing. Hopefully it goes through money for the West Florissant project. So the earmark was transportation related too. And one of our great needs is like up in the North County area. That's where we see our heat maps telling us that we have high pedestrian crashes and just a need based on the number of people that use transit up there, the need to accommodate the transit and pedestrians up in North County. So we've been fighting like mad to get West Florissant rebuilt.
One last thing is history. When I was on the board in Baldwin, you know, we did the great streets on Manchester, between Manchester and Wildwood, and Councilwoman Days saw that the other day when we were out traveling around. It's a nice project, but it's now almost 10 years old and it's starting to, you know, show its wear. And I don't know if MoDOT is going to give money to do resurfacing, or, you know, when you start these projects, they're great for about 5 years and then they need maintenance, or the islands need maintenance, or,
Right.
or it doesn't seem to me, you know, they put in things even people push back on to slow the traffic down. And I don't know if it's really slowed it down. I will say one of the things that they pushed for was the zoning change to make sure all properties, adjoining properties, could go from one property to the other
cross access, yeah.
without going out onto Manchester Road. And I think that was a important piece. I think that helped out a lot because it is very frustrating on a Saturday to go out on the Manchester, come back in and go
I
back out,
agree
come
with
back in.
you. I
And you
experience
live
that
out
all the
there, you
time.
know it.
But I think, because I was part of the early meetings for that Great Streets project, and I think a lot of the stall came dealing with the property side. You know, even if somebody has that large parking field, you know, taking that to get those flanking roads, because they wanted kind of frontage roads, if you will, to take people off mainline Manchester and put them on these frontage roads, and then the development would be behind that. That's great in theory, and then you have to deal with the property owners.
Right, right, and get their cooperation to just put in an apron or a driveway, you know, to go from one property to the next in some fashion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's some of the things that we're incorporating to a greater degree, shoring up the access points and providing cross access along West Florissant.
But even today, with all the new walks that were put in and all these things, I still don't see anybody riding their bike close to Manchester Road.
I know, and a
I
lot of
wouldn't
it's not
either.
even ADA compliant after some of the things that were done. And I'm not throwing shade at MoDOT because we have some of the similar issues. You know, as many things as you put in the basket, you always see all the things that still are outside of the basket. And there's a lot of ADA improvements that still need to happen. And I agree with you, where I see a lot of people riding their bikes is actually on Clayton. It's like
Right, it's a,
Peloton.
right. And they don't, and even though there's a bike path there in Town and Country, they don't ride on the bike path, they ride on the street.
Yeah.
So you're dodging bikes and people are walking dogs on this 10-foot bike path. So yeah, it just seems different in that, and that's a behavioral change. So I'm sorry, I used a lot of time, but.
Thank you. Councilwoman Donovan.
I actually think Councilman Fitch was ahead of me.
Okay, Councilman Fitch, I didn't see you, sorry.
That's okay. I just have one question. So the pedestrian crosswalks we see around the county, the pedestrian walks up, they want to cross the street, they hit the button, the lights start flashing yellow, they go across. My question is people seem to ignore those yellow flashing lights. Since we want them to stop, is there a reason why those lights are yellow and not red when they flash?
Are you referring to the flashing yellow arrows?
No, so let's see, let me think of a county road. Ridge Elementary School, Ridge Meadows Elementary School in Ridge. You familiar with that trail? People walk down one side, they have to go across Ridge Road. It's in Councilman Harder's district. They push the button, the lights flash yellow, they go across, but half the time the cars ignore the flashing yellow lights. Is there a reason why those lights are not red?
Okay, so yes, that is a beacon. That's a precursor to the rapid rectangular flashing beacon, which is supposed to keep traffic moving with the pedestrian, is supposed to yield when they see the pedestrian, or the vehicle is supposed to yield when they see the pedestrian. We have a lot of bad driver behavior. And that's honestly, it's one of the big reasons why I told you we haven't adopted those RRFBs or pedestrian hybrid beacons. And we've put in, when we see the need, we generally put in a full pedestrian signal for exactly that reason. Driver education is a problem, and getting people to actually yield to the pedestrians as they're required to by law is a problem.
Yeah, my suggestion is if we turn those lenses red instead of amber, it would send a message, I think, to the drivers. This is like a stop sign. You have to stop. Yellow is a caution color, so they don't automatically see that as, is that an ordinance change that we would just have to change the ordinance to say you have to stop for these and change the lights over to red? Is it that simple?
I believe that's actually in the MUTCD as a requirement of a beacon, but I will check into that.
And I'm sure there's others. That's just the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
And Councilman Fitch, you know that obviously to assure that people are going to stop, we'd need some police enforcement out there for a time so that people know we mean business. You have to stop for pedestrians.
Yeah, and I just think it's easier to enforce if that light is red as opposed to yellow.
Yeah, if we can make it red and it's compliant with the MUTCD, then obviously it would have to be adopted into the traffic code. And that goes through you all to adopt. You get those from time to time when we want to install stop signs or other things. So, you know, if that's something that we can do, we would certainly have to have that.
Do you have a where all those are located around the county? I mean, can we get
Absolutely.
can we get a list of where those locations are? And I would be happy to take it and carry it to the council and say, my suggestion is we turn all of these red and make them enforceable for like stop signs or red lights. And that we just adopt them all would be my suggestion.
Okay.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Councilwoman Dunaway.
Yeah, so my first question is, you mentioned that you have a reputation for being a poor place to work. Why is that?
In the professional community, we are known as the place that you will come and never get a raise.
And that's it.
Uh,
I mean, that's a lot, but
That's, yeah, as far as culture, we have a good culture. Our employees that stick with us generally do seem to like working for us, but it's hard to get someone in the door when we're paying an engineer with 10 years experience, the same as everyone else is paying a kid out of college.
I mean,
And that's not anecdotal. I mean, that is really, we just, our ACEC, talking with industry professionals. Asked them just point blank. And they paid them what we pay some of our seasoned engineers. And I've been trying to do all I can through the Civil Service Commission to adjust pay, but again, the funding is still finite. But just trying to change the recruitment rate that I can get people in.
and you know, I've heard, this is the third time I've heard you guys say, like, we're at a catastrophic point. We don't have money. We don't have people. So I know you're looking to us for guidance, but if there's no political will, there's no public will, what can we do? What can we do to help start to solve some of these issues? I mean, do you want us to raise taxes and give everybody salary bumps and buy more roads and sidewalks?
Well, there are a few things that I think could be done, and this hasn't been vetted through Stephanie, just full disclosure. One of the things that I would like to see is that we enshrine cost of living increases into ordinance. So budget season comes up every year. The county executive doesn't have an option to say, no, we're pay freezing. We're not gonna reduce services. Because the simple fact is that by not providing that COLA, we are reducing services because we have people that leave and we can't provide the service. So it's hard to understand, I think, for the outside, but the reality is if we would enshrine cost of living, we would significantly triage our losses, just based it on, national inflation. When we're looking at how we're spending our money, honestly, I'm looking to the council to know, are we meeting your expectations? I don't have a strong preference on exactly how we spend our transportation money. We do our best to balance all the concerns that we see. But if you don't think we're doing that to your wishes, please just give us direction. We certainly can pivot.
I mean, we get calls, people call us yelling at us every week about how bad the roads are all over the district. But I can't say that I don't feel like you're meeting my expectations because you're one of dozens of county departments that come in here every year and tell us we can't recruit talent, we can't retain talent, we can't keep up with these levels of service because we're in a 1960s regulatory environment with 21st century needs. And so I don't know how to even respond to the question, are you meeting our needs?
That's fair. One of the other things that I would very much like to see is looking at our zoning ordinances. I think ultimately, and the problems we have are not unique. The problems we have span the country. The way we have built out is not sustainable. We have cities and counties all over the country that are failing economically for exactly the same reasons we're failing economically. So will we pivot and turn immediately? Absolutely not. Like I said, this is a generational change. I have talked to Jacob Trimble in Department of Planning about these issues, and he also agrees with this. He unfortunately couldn't be here today. But if we start turning the ship, at least maybe, new developments as they come in or something that are a little higher density, a little more walkable, a little more connected. Let's start looking at those 1965 ordinances, and that's free. relatively. There's manpower involved, but it's not an expense that we're paying in dollars. We can start turning the ship.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Are you done?
Mhm.
Maybe this is the $64,000 question. What should we be maybe thinking a totally different way, thinking about, incorporating a lot of unincorporated space and turning this over to the individual taxpayers of those areas in certain parts and taking it out of county hands? If you look at like St. Charles County, they have some mega cities within the county and a lot less unincorporated area. Most are unincorporated is rural type of unincorporated. Everything else is St. Charles, O'Fallon, St. Peters, Cottleville. They're taking care of their own and they take care of their, whatever they have to do in those areas. And the county almost becomes an umbrella type support instead of the main support for some of those projects.
Well, to that point, I'll say a couple of things. First, you're assuming that the cities can maintain additional roads. I discussed Big Bend, for example, with the city of Kirk. I said, what if it changed complexion? It seems like it would become your. And they said, no way. We don't have enough people. We have 12 people to maintain, the roads. We have this overlay TDD. We potentially will get more for. So you have to assume that the municipalities have the money to maintain, which I would venture to say they don't. I mean, when you brought up a number of years ago about Baxter, I talked with the city manager, Bowen, at the time, and he's like, God, no, don't give it to me. I don't want it. I can't maintain it. So I think a lot of them are in a similar situation as us. Then the thought is that giving up some of that mileage means that we're free and clear. Since we are not maintaining roads as we should, if we shed that mileage, we might start to break even, but we're not going to be shedding trucks and shedding people because we're struggling right now to maintain what we have. So there's no shedding of, assets and suddenly freeing up money because we're so far behind. What my concern would be then is that if you even said that there was a way and the municipalities could fund it, you would offload something, and then I would think that MoDOT would be quick to want to have a conversation about things that they have long said are not roads for them to maintain, and that we would suddenly start getting the Olive Road, Lindbergh, and other things and they focus on the interstate system. Just because it's not just a St. Louis County thing, from municipal on up to state. The fact of the matter is I can't say it enough. I cannot say it enough. Our state and our communities do not have enough money for transportation. We have got to generate more money. I can't tell you what that is. I can tell you it's every possible thing you can think of because we don't have enough. Our state does not bring in enough money for transportation. I think we sit at 48 of 50 states in what we generate in revenue for roads. It's not enough.
And we've heard that, and I agree with you. With the new gas tax that was just passed, do we get any of that?
We estimate we might get about $2 to $4 million. Now we have to, that was based on when they were proposing this a couple years ago. I got out some more data, I got to read it. But it funnels through formula through the gas tax. And, our cart is generated not from population, but it's rural assessed valuation and mileage in the unincorporated areas. So we don't even get money for the arterial roads that transcend in municipalities that we have to maintain. Where the munis get their cart, if memory serves, from population. And then road and bridge, I think, is based on assessed valuation. So, taking all that into consideration, we think we'd get about 2 to 4 million, which I will take in a heartbeat. I will absolutely take that, but it's not the panacea. We're not going to walk away with $50 million.
Because the way I understand it is that, the 2 cents goes up each year over the next 5 years or whatever. And you got increased gas prices, which is a multiplier, so at least while gas prices are high right now.
Cars are efficient and everything.
Right.
So, and I only speak for myself. Okay. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I hope it passes because we need that money.
We do.
For
Let me, we have 5 speakers, I understand, and I want to make sure that we give an opportunity for those speakers. And of course, we'll be here to kind of interact with you, if we need to. So let's get to the speakers, and if there's something that we can interject in between, let's do that, all right? Madam Clerk, would you call the first speaker, please?
Yes, ma'am. Our first speaker is Michael Carmody.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee council members. My name is Michael Carmody. I'm representing today Safer Streets for Kirkwood, St. Louis County, which encompasses our region. We're a grassroots group created by local citizens focused on improving the safety and efficiency of our region's roads, school crosswalks, sidewalks, bike paths, for all users and all abilities. Before I go into my song and dance here, let me just say one thing. For my children's children, don't turn off the lights in St. Louis County by not allowing and not building on bikeable and walkable infrastructure. It is proven time and time again across the country that it generates income for each municipality and for the county. First of all, we thank you for responding positively to our communications by holding this hearing. We urge you to stay on this course and listen to the comments and look carefully at the insight that's being provided. Traffic violence here in St. Louis County is extremely complex and actually it's impossible to cover in this 3 minutes. Some of you have had pedestrians, bicyclists struck recently, killed. It's on and on. Our pedestrian and bicycle fatalities keep on growing. The policies and outdated practices in the transportation department are dangerous by design. The financial shortfalls in the transportation department are directly tied into those practices. I'll give you one quick example. Big Ben was brought up. We're getting ready in Kirkwood to have a resurfacing done. They're gonna recover the road. They're gonna cover over safety again because there's no safety elements put into it. It's a $2 million project for less than a mile. No sidewalks. No infrastructure changes that provide tangible, proven practices. The county bought out. Instead of getting 80-20, paying 20% on the $2 million, they went ahead and paid $645,000 extra. This is 1 mile of all those roadways we're talking about. One single mile, $645,000 out the window. At the same time, there's a crash analysis, KABCO, that was done on this exact same area. $5 million in cost of those crashes, $5 million. And how much is the county putting in to curb those crashes? I've got funding applications. I've tried to share them with you all in the past couple of years. It seems like I have a vacuum after I send a communication. Last point I'd like to make is for over the last 10 years, the guide St. Louis County has been following is outdated, dangerous by design, and it's being addressed right now, but it's going to be a slow, long address. Wow, there are other opportunities available that can be incorporated legally and make our roads safer for all. When you make roads safer for pedestrians and bicyclists, we have the data, it becomes even safer for the motorist. There are many advancements that are available that aren't being utilized in data and planning. I'm asking that you ensure the timing and action plan to address today's hearing is transparent and it immediately starts to put into practice better financial methods that are available along with safety, because it's going to be somebody in your family, my family. It's inevitable, just amount of time. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing back from you all. May I approach and give you the minutes?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David Eagleton.
Hello, I'd like to thank Madam Chairwoman and all council members. I'd also like to thank Stephanie and Joe for their very thorough presentation. I've sent a letter to all the members. I don't know if everyone got it, but I just want to talk about that there's the word dangerous design is something that is being perpetuated in St. Louis County. It starts with the planning and designing of these roads. Now, I know that it's been brought up numerous times that it's all about funding. Actually, this starts at the planning and design phase. And that's where the focus should be on, because you're looking at a road, and Mr. Carmody brought up a road at Big Bend. There's two roads in Ballas and Big Bend are two projects that the county is working on. And there's a complete absence of any bike and ped improvements to improve safety. So you've got these dangerous design roads in St. Louis County. You've got a 45% increase in the injuries and deaths of pedestrians. And what I hear from Stephanie and Joe is I hear a lot of excuses. I haven't heard anything from them to address the increase of injuries and deaths on St. Louis County on roads. There are numerous proven solutions that are being used all across the United States of America. And as a matter of fact, they're using them in the city of St. Louis. NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, has a street design best practices. The city of St. Louis is a NACTO member. I worked with former Mayor Lyda Crewson. They became a member. I strongly recommend St. Louis County becomes a member of NACTO and starts working with St. Louis City together as a region to design our roads to improve the safety of all users. So what I hear is that it's all about costs. Well, actually, it starts at the planning and design phase, and then I hear about costs. So what does it do if we work together with the city of St. Louis? Well, NACTO has 73 other members. You have access to the 73 other cities across the country who are working on these projects, and they're proven and successfully implemented improved safety. I have not heard one thing from Joe or Stephanie on how they're going to improve the safety on roads in St. Louis County. All I've heard is excuses about cost. I didn't hear any strategy to talk about utilizing the proven, successfully implemented safety measures that are being implemented all across the country. And if you go east of Skinker, they're being implemented all across the city. I'll give you one example. In Kirkwood, I'm also on the Planning and Zoning Commission. We approved a project on Adams Road at Clay, and we approved raised crosswalks. The county vetoed the raised crosswalk. It's directly across from a school. There is no empirical data the county can come forward with, the transportation department, that says that raised crosswalks are not effective. As a matter of fact, there's a 45% increase in safety. Okay, they mentioned STEP. These are opportunities that we have to improve safety on St. Louis County roads. I'll mention one other situation. I don't know if you know what a channelizing lane is when you go right, you merge, are you, that the people, when you go right, you don't have to, there's an island and you go right. And the first thing a driver does is they look left because they're looking at oncoming traffic. We requested, or the city of Kirkwood requested, signs to be put up that say, watch for pedestrians. MoDOT approved the signs. The St. Louis County Department of Transportation said they wouldn't put them up. I mean, these are small things to work with communities to improve safety. I don't understand why the county transportation department isn't working with communities throughout the county to improve safety. So I would strongly recommend that the county become a NACTO member. I think it would benefit St. Louis County and the region. One other thing is that there's a peer advisory committee that's part of the Complete Streets Ordinance. And the peer advisory committee members should be involved in the planning, the design, budget, and funding of every road project. Right now, the way it works is it's kind of a farce because the members on that committee are notified of the projects once they've been completed. So, and there's very little transparency. I hope that this committee will look at becoming a NACTO member for the county and for our region to improve pedestrian safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cindy Menz.
Good afternoon. Thank you, council members, for taking time to hear more information about pedestrian safety. My name is Cindy Mentz. I'm the CEO of TrailNet, a 501c3 focused for 32 years on making it safer for people to walk, bike, and use transit in the St. Louis region. I'm also a resident of St. Louis County. I want to thank the council members for last year supporting County Bill number 385 to improve safety for people biking and helping to fulfill your mission to promote health, safety, and ensure sound infrastructure. In order to improve safety for people walking in St. Louis County and its municipalities, TrailNet encourages the county council staff to take 3 actions that will help improve those outcomes. Currently, the fatalities have been their highest in the last 10 years. For a note, last year we had 93 fatalities in St. Louis County. So the 3 actions are, 1, to update the design criteria manual. Secondly, to increase public participation and transparency of the Complete Streets process. And 3, to implement the St. Louis County Action Plan for walking and biking. In order to improve the design criteria manual, it needs to include more people-focused elements. The criteria mentioned, called STEP, which is put out by the Federal Highway Association, is one way to do that, including following NACTO, the National Association for City Transportation Officials. Those are also good ways to make the criteria manual better. We also support you becoming NACTO members and have access to all of that expertise, especially when you're hurting for staffing. Specifically in the design criteria manual, the design speed for county-maintained residential roads is too high. 30 miles per hour is dangerous on residential streets. 20% of people who are struck at 30 miles per hour will not survive, compared to 93% who will survive if the rate is 20 miles per hour. If the county lowers the speed limit, local municipalities can also follow through with their standard, and it will support their desire to have lower speed limits on residential streets. So the county sets the standard. Municipalities don't do their own design criteria manual. They look to the county for that leadership. So that will support them. Additionally, in the design criteria manual, there are unapproved traffic controls in chapter 5.10.3. And these prohibitions run counter to the federal recommendations for pedestrian safety along crosswalks and trails. So specifically, pedestrian hybrid beacons and rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are supported by federal highway and the STEP criteria, are prohibited. These are cost-effective options that can replace traditional traffic signals and improve vehicles stopping and yielding for people walking. Likewise, raised crosswalks help slow traffic speeds and improve the visibility of people crossing the streets. These are being implemented throughout the region. TrailNet's specifically involved with the city right now in adding raised crosswalks along Tower Grove Avenue. We ask the county staff to review and revise these prohibitions based on federal guidance, STEP, and NACTO recommendations. Secondly, we'd like to improve public participation and transparency of the Complete Streets Advisory Group. This can be achieved by either reviewing projects earlier in the pipeline to include ongoing feedback until completion, or to create a separate group to do this review on projects earlier, and in addition to the traditional role that the peer advisory group has taken. We'd also like to encourage the staff and the county council to implement the action plan for walking and biking. Thank you for completing this important document. It outlines disparities in the community. We looked at car ownership, health outcomes, and transit use. We haven't heard a lot about transit today, but transit begins with pedestrians being able to safely access transit. So in implementing the action plan, we recommend that you incorporate actions that address these disparities. We focus on sidewalk fill-in. All of this, I think, can help the staff be more strategic. They put this document together to be strategic and to have priorities that they've identified through this process. All of this is grounded in our desire to help improve public input and participation. We stand ready to partner with the county if they need additional help or support in getting this work done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ben Schlurer. Sorry if I messed that up.
3-month-old. Thank you for hearing us. I just want to briefly, why I'm here is there's a small project that I want to just get some answers for, or just put out there. There's a small area on Ballas between Harflow and Clayton. It's where Depair ends and Town and Country begins. The sidewalk just ends. There's no sidewalk in Town and Country. Our ward alderman and a group of people, we put together a survey. It was like 157 people. According to our alderman, there's more people. She said West County had more participants attend open houses, and our Ballas Road survey had more responses than St. Louis County's combined total of participants in all of the open houses. So in our community, it's a big thing because it connects Depair Park to Clayton, the path on Clayton, which connects to Queenie Park. There's also other things. I mean, if you go north on Ballas, it can connect to the Ballas Transit Center. You can even go all the way up to Olive, but if you want to go from Depair Park north, you have to walk on a section with no sidewalk. And the speed limit's 40 miles per hour there. So where I live, I can't take my son to the park. I can't walk there, I have to drive there, because I'm not gonna walk on the road with my my son on a 40-mile-per-hour road. And the action plan, you know, there's the feasibility, there's safety. So, I mean, having people walk on a 40-mile-per-hour road with no sidewalk is that's bad. Connectivity, it's a huge connectivity thing. You know, the action plan says it wants to connect, you know, things in the community or in the county. I mean, Depair Park, the trail on Clayton, it goes to Queenie Park. It connects to it could connect to the Ballas Transit Center. I know there's bus stops on Clayton, so that's a huge connectivity. plus their, health. People can walk more because, people in our community, they want to walk on ballast, but they can't because it's unsafe. And also demand, I mean, I think there's 157 people that we put together that wanted to increase the walkability on ballast. And that is also public support. So you have all these factors, and the action plan deemed that 1 mile stretch was of low priority. So I just want to put it forth and see why it was a low priority, since it met so many points on the action plan's feasibility and core values. And plus it had the biggest support. So why would a project with your supposed biggest support of your community members have the lowest priority? So if the council or people could look into that, people in our area would be greatly appreciated, because we feel it's an important cog in the wheel and of everything that was talked today about safety and connectivity and safe, health and public support and demand, all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure it's not going to be the cheapest project, but it could be, a huge thing that connects our community. So thank you, and hopefully our walkways and roads can be safer. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 second, sir.
Yeah, a couple questions. The piece of sidewalk you're saying is missing,
Yeah.
about how long?
It's about a mile.
Mile
It
is,
goes from Harflow to Clayton.
is it on the east side of Ballas or west side?
It's on the east side.
Okay, and Ballas is a county maintained road,
Yeah.
correct? And do we have, and this is a Stephanie question, do we have the easements to finish that? As this, because the developer, because usually developers are required to put in that sidewalk when they develop a subdivision, correct?
No,
Madam Chair, the microphone is not going to be able to pick her up
If you
for the
don't mind.
recording.
Oh.
If she could come forward.
Sorry.
Thank you.
that depends. There's some subdivisions where we have requested sidewalk, and for whatever reason, maybe they're not put in exactly, maybe the subdivision, maybe it's only a lot split or something like that, and they're not recommended by the Department of Planning. And then it depends on what is existing in the field already. So we get pushback from developers, and rightly so. I'm not saying it's not correct from their point of view, that if they're building one development and there's no sidewalk anywhere to the left and none to the right, they're like, why would I build? Why do I have to spend the money to build a sidewalk that goes nowhere? And so, years ago, when I started with the county, we'd always fight that and push that, and the support for that is not as strong these days. So typically, if they're kind of lone out there, it's not necessarily something that becomes part of the development. So then you do have those pockets of areas that don't have sidewalk. Whether or not it's, a mile of sidewalk is not cheap. I think we estimate that usually just on a high level is $1 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that really depends on what right of way is, how cheaply or not we can get the right of way, and if there's trees involved, and how we're affecting access. So the sidewalk could be very important, but usually sidewalk is expensive to build.
And sidewalk can run a very wide range of costs. For example, we just finished a segment on Berry Road, which was 1,000 feet long, and it cost about $1 million.
So can we look into the situation?
Sorry,
And I didn't
can
get your
actually
last
answer his
name, sir.
question.
Yeah, why was it low?
Yes.
No, your last name.
I swear.
SCHWERE.
So in general terms, each of the sites, each of the segments that was identified, there's a matrix of what different criteria, how the impact was. And there are significant impacts for communities without cars, communities in extreme poverty, communities with severe health impacts. So those are, even where there's large community support, there's a lot of other boxes that are on that analysis.
I pretty much named health demand.
So let me suggest at this point, though, we don't need to have a back and forth. I
No, no,
suggest you
I
get
would-
in touch with Mr. Schreier,
Absolutely.
and then we can kind of figure out what it is that, your community is requesting and see what we can do to accommodate that. Okay?
Madam Chair?
Councilman Fitch?
This is my district. I'm familiar with this particular issue, been contacted by many residents and elected officials in that area. One of the things that I have planned is to go out and actually look at this with some of the constituents and then bring forward and see what the Department of Transportation can do for this particular stretch. So that's already in the works.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rachel Bates.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Rachel Bates, and I am here as a resident of, I believe it's District 6. I live in New England Town subdivision, which is the subdivision that is right next to Cliff Cave Park in unincorporated St. Louis County. Our problem in our subdivision is not necessarily getting the sidewalks. We actually live in a walkable utopia. I can walk through Cliff Cave Park from my house. I can walk to the shopping plaza from my house to go get coffee or whatever. It's a beautiful neighborhood. Our problem is enforcement. We have two access points to Cliff Cave Park. One of them is Cliff Cave Road, which is the main kind of road. It's a higher speed limit. And then we have New England Town, the main drag, which is a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, and it goes directly through our subdivision. It also contains 2 stop signs, and it contains, at each stop sign is a bus stop. And consistently, daily, 100 times a day, people are just completely blowing through these stop signs. Whether there's a bus stop there or not, they don't care. They just go straight through because they're going straight through Cliff Cave Park. These aren't residents of our subdivisions. They're using it as a cut through. So what we would like for the council and the committee to examine is how to change this. What kind of, traffic enforcement, and I've talked to council person Trackus about this and asked for, speed bumps, or maybe we are a possibility for these chicanes, these jogs in the path that we can kind of get to deter people from blowing through these stop signs and just going 50 miles per hour down our subdivision, because we do walk everywhere. We take advantage of this pedestrian centric idea. It's a beautiful residence, it's a beautiful subdivision, but we need help figuring out how to make it a more walkable subdivision so that someone doesn't get hurt. A lot of times, I go out walking at night. I have, with some girlfriends at 9 o'clock at night, and it's a wonderful place to be. But if I'm not wearing a bright neon color, there's a strong possibility that there's going to be an injury that happens because people just don't stop. My council person has suggested that speed bumps are not necessarily the best solution, but I'm looking for other solutions. Can we do a traffic study? Can we do the raised pedestrian walkways? Can we do something that's going to slow people down as they're coming through? And that's my main concern today, is just to express that on behalf of our residents. We have the subdivision that people want to live in. My property values went up $40,000 last year. This is a place people want to be, and we need assistance in keeping our residents safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that's all the speakers.
Thank you. Councilman Harder?
Yes, Stephanie, could you answer the lady's comments there? Is there anything that can be done in that instance? Are you familiar with the problem that she's having?
I'm not immediately familiar with the problem, but I can have our operations folks look at the area and perform a traffic study and see, what is going on and see if there's opportunities to deal with the traffic differently. Obviously going through stop signs, that's an enforcement issue. That's not something my department can deal with. But if they're speeding through, then, perhaps there is, something we can do, but we'd have to analyze it first.
What is in your tool bag, so to speak, of things, because I'm sure her problem is not unique. So what can you do in these situations across the county?
Well, lately, especially since I became acting director, I'm challenging staff to think differently about, how we deal with these issues in subdivisions and on our roadways. So, speed bumps and tables are not necessarily things that we gravitate towards, but, bulb outs and different things that kind of give you visually that constriction that might tend to slow traffic down is potentially something that we can do. We'd have to look at, effects on drainage and obviously maintenance and everything. But, we just first have to see what's out there. So, I don't know. Obviously, putting up more stop signs and things like that is not the answer, because that's not how you solve
Sure.
all your problems.
And then finally, the lady that was here from TrailNet, are we partnering with them on any projects that they can help pay for, since we are?
Well,
pretty
that's
thin on
interesting. I
that?
don't know if she was proposing to pay for them. I'll certainly take
Well,
her money if she was. But we actually have worked with Cindy on the action plan for walking and biking. So they were a great champion for us, and they're involved, I believe, in our quarterly meeting.
Advisory Council,
Yeah.
the last meeting, we're on the Peer Advisory Council. At the last meeting, Larry Welty, who was leading the meeting on staff in the County Transportation Department, said that they wanted to form a committee to work on the design criteria manual. And TrailNet said, well, sign us up. We'll join that committee. We've already reviewed it. We got a long list of things and resources of how we think it could be improved. So I'm just waiting for that committee to start, and also reached out to others to see who would be happy to participate.
are
So
there any places along TrailNet's network that cross county streets that you could take care of, like a raised crosswalk or some signage or whatever that your organization can contribute to improve safety as they cross those roads?
that would be the taxing district, which is Great Rivers Greenway. So the confusion is that TrailNet started building the trails in the region, but I'm sure that Stephanie can speak to that. They're also on the Peer Advisory Council.
Yeah, we can. I mean, we will. There's a couple of things that Cindy had mentioned, the opportunity for our partnership to help us and assist us in the review of new standards and updates and this new direction that we've been embarking on now for almost a year. And we've also been talking about trying to incorporate a larger fabric in the analysis of our projects in the conceptualization stage. What we're finding is that typical people will say, I've got my own job, because we have a consortium of an interdepartmental group with St. Louis County. And Jacob Trimble, for example, is a member, and he's great to work with, but he has his job too. So to spend time and going through the details of our engineering projects, even in the conceptualization stage, takes time. You got to really think through the logistics, and you got to engage the public and whatever. So, folks have other jobs. So to the extent that we can embrace the folks that want to participate and assist us, that's the direction that we're moving.
But I'm just saying, from the standpoint that the Greenway is a taxing district, it's a taxing jurisdiction, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you collect a tax that we all pay on a property tax or sales tax. So you've got a source of money that maybe we could tap that for these little projects that cost, $5,000 or $10,000. That would, if
And I
there's
think-
enough of those, we don't have to pay for them, and we could share that.
There are
cost.
instances where we have, where Great Rivers Greenway have said, we want to take our crossing across this road, and it's about permitting, and will we be in agreement to, maybe put and lay down green paint, call out the trail or do something different. And I have been a supporter of that, and I get a little pushback from my staff to do things that are non-traditional. But if other agencies like Great Rivers or whoever would also assist with the maintenance of those things, then, I'm more open. I think that I'm more open than a lot of people before me.
Well, just from the financial that contribute. I mean,
Mhm.
we can put down paint, but somebody's got to pay for the paint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I add a comment? So the county has representation on the board for Great Rivers Greenway. And so those priorities could be communicated that way as well. And I think everybody here would agree that to be able to get to a trail or a greenway without having to get in your car is a worthwhile effort. And I believe that was somewhat what the gentleman prior was talking about is, can we get to these places without having to get into a car and making it safer?
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other council members? No questions? All right, thank you all so much for coming, and meeting adjourned.
That's, Hey, Mark? No, that's already part of the process that